relatively good relationship before Hitler. Why couldn't it be that again? So the same thing in America. I mean, the anti-Semitism in this country was enormous during the 30s and 40s and prior to that.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that for one moment. The racism towards blacks and every other minority was enormous in this country. Let's not forget that. So we have come a long way on all fronts to find a way to understand each other more, you know? I mean, look at the potential that is wasted by prejudice. It's pitiful and tragic. But that has all improved and will continue to improve. It is inevitable, primarily as regards the social media. I mean, I'm on Twitter, and I cannot believe the immediacy of the responses. Unbelievable. From anywhere in the world. It's incredible. There's a whole new world, you know? So, but right now what's happening in the Middle East is an enormously complex situation. And it's in other words, the Middle East, I feel, is going through what Europe went through 300-400 years ago, namely the religious schism in the case of the Middle East between Shiites and Sunnis and various groupings thereof, the Alawites in Syria, and of course in Europe, the age-old controversy between Catholics and Protestants, both believing in the Lord and fighting each other to the death for centuries. When you begin to understand history, you begin to understand the insanity of these schisms. Both Shiites and Sunnis believe in Muhammad, yet they fight each other over essentially who interprets him better. It's insane. The Catholics and the Protestants. Are you kidding me? Now that has become subdued, obviously, and doesn't really exist anymore. Certainly to the point of fighting wars, except in Northern Ireland. When you think of that, it's extraordinary. In the British Isles, one of the birthplaces of democracy, they're still having this sectarian warfare, has also been subsiding a little, but it's still there. So there's much to do, you know. You can never be vigilant enough. Be careful, because you must pay attention unless you are overcome suddenly by the rise of Hitler in Germany. You know, in Germany, most people didn't think that that loudmouth would make it. No, didn't think so. No, for a long time they didn't. And suddenly, won the first election he was turned down, the second one he won, barely, he was in power. Once he was in power, he abrogated all democratic rights. Before you knew it, he had ensconced himself in absolute power. Once he took over in 1933, he arrested all opposition political leaders. All the newspapers that were against him, he closed. He immediately incarcerated all those who opposed him in free elections. People forget how quickly that happened. But you had no television then. You had no internet then. Nowadays that's different. You can't pull that shit anymore.
No.
You know? So, nevertheless, you have to pay attention. We need to change the right of both Democrats and Republicans to redistrict areas. That's bullshit. What is that? There should be no law to allow gerrymandering. Should not be allowed. Kidding? There you are. Soccer to gymnastics to track and field later on, and I had 4 serious brain concussions between the age of 9 and 12, and hence ended up in track and field because the doctors had forbidden me to do any contact sport. Okay. Because I loved boxing then and loved soccer, but I didn't play it then for a while. And I got into track and field, did discus, javelin, and shot put.
Any personal records?
Well, we won the German Youth Championship, the team that I was on. Okay. And sports have always been for me, and still are. It's the most calming thing for me there is. I love it, love it. I can't live without it, to be honest with you. And nowadays, of course, it's limited to working out. You know, I work out about once or twice a day, but I tell you, it's the best pill there is. There's nothing better for you and for your mind than working out. The feeling of exhaustion, nothing better than that. It's wonderful. And for me, it was a way out of a very tough childhood. We were bombed to smithereens, and afterwards, after the war, it was tough to rebuild Germany. And I grew up, we moved to the countryside, and I grew up more or less in the countryside, which was a blessing. Worked on farms and all that. And my father died when I was 12, and we were sort of plunged into poverty, really. And working on farms, I made some money, and then sports is what helped me forget that, you know. People forget how dehumanizing poverty is, how difficult it is for people to maintain a healthy attitude towards life when you don't have enough to eat at home, or when you realize that in my case, your mother is struggling to put food on the table. And there are millions in America right now who are suffering from that. And any attempt to stop aid to them, I find inhuman and counterproductive. So the anger that builds up, I had fights, always had fights as a kid, because you're angry about things you can't explain. You are envious of others who have more, and it creates a lot of anger. And sports for me was a way out of that. It was a way to feel good. And we must not forget, if we don't solve the hunger problem, and the problem that has befallen a lot of families right now here in America who don't know how to put food on the table, it creates an enormous potential for anger, you know, which could manifest itself in many ways. So, one of the great inventions that FDR came up with was Social Security. Do you know how many people would go hungry now if they didn't have Social Security? And some of those idiots in Congress want to do away with that? Are you kidding? Are you serious? That's unconscionable. I used to box in the ghetto for years here in Los Angeles, down 78th and Hoover. Hoover Street Gym doesn't exist anymore. And 108th and Broadway. And right here in LA, you drive certain areas, you see poverty, you know, stark poverty. And it's a pity.
A lot of people don't realize it's more than just movies and movie stars in Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So all you got to do is drive around LA, certain areas, and you say, whoa, you know. So to take that safety net away from people, like Social Security or Medicaid in America, is unconscionable. Unconscionable. And that's why I take certain political views. Because I've seen the results of it. And I've experienced it myself. So I wish my mother then had received some kind of a stipend from the government. Would have relieved a lot of problems. At that time that wasn't the case. It came later. So you grow up angry. Boom. Someone looks at you cross-eyed, you go after them. You know? And multiply that by millions of people. Mexico, the immigration problem. Why do you think they came to this country? Because the poverty in Mexico is the chasm between rich and poor is so enormous and growing that it's a safety valve. I tell you one thing, the entire immigration question is very difficult. I'm an immigrant. And when I came here at the age of 18, I wouldn't have begun to question America's laws or the fact that I had to learn English. Wouldn't question it. So in that sense, I understand certain people saying, if you come to this country, you learn English. Period. That's it. It's the major language. You don't demand that two languages be spoken simultaneously. I'm against that. On the other hand, I understand why those desperate and destitute people from Mexico and Central America tried to cross the border into America to just have jobs. I understand that. And you have to understand it also from a geopolitical point of view. It started in the 60s, or earlier than that, and 70s and 80s. It was a safety valve. We didn't want another Cuba to happen in Mexico. Think about that. If we had closed the borders completely, we would have left in Mexico a revolutionary potential. We didn't want that. So one closed one eye and said, well, let them come. On top of that, all restaurants, the clothing industry, restaurant industry, households, and mostly the agribusiness, which is a huge business in California, profits from that cheap labor, has for decades profited from it. So we have always been very hypocritical about it, you know?
A long history of it.
Of course, utterly hypocritical about it. Because those who have shouted the loudest against it are the ones who profit from it. So there were self-serving reasons to allow that many people to cross the border. We did not want another potential revolution in Mexico because we had seen what happened in Cuba, with whom we should have had dealings much earlier anyway. That's a different story. Trust me, if we had said to Castro, Fidel, baby, we'll do dealings with you, let's have trade with you, the Russians would never have had their rockets there. Never, ever would not have happened. Fidel would have said, yeah, just, you know, allow me a certain form of socialism, but beyond that we'll do dealings with you. What did we do? We had a stupid foreign policy in regard to that. Dumb foreign policy in regard to that. Anyway. This afternoon I sparred with someone and did that. So then tomorrow morning I lift weights. I do Olympic lifting, clean and jerks and deadlifts. Although the back is beginning to hurt a little bit more these days. And then I will do cardio in the form of either treadmill or on the stationary bike watching sports, you know. I don't run that much anymore. I used to run, but I had my hip resurfaced 2 years ago. I'm 72 years old, and so finally the hip gave out, and had it resurfaced. There was still enough substance left to not cut this off, but they took it out and they put a cap on it and put it back in again. So I'm a little wary of wearing it out. I miss playing soccer a lot, but there are all kinds of ways to torture the body, you know. I love tennis, played a lot, and because of what I do, I had a chance to play with a lot of very good people, you know, with a lot of the pros in exhibition matches, games, and my doubles game is pretty good. Singles, I think one of the worst mistakes ever made in American tennis is the development of the hard court. The worst. Bad for your knees, bad for your hips. It's bad for you. Orthopedic, I mean, it's bad. And the top players now all come from clay. Think about it. Djokovic, the Spaniards, Nadal, Federer, they all come from clay. Because in clay, you learn how to, you last longer. You have to be more patient constructing a point than you do in hard court. Hard court is easier to take care of, more practical, but very hard on the body. I think it's a mistake. We should never have allowed it. And if we want to, in America, get to the forefront of tennis again, we better develop players on clay. I'm dead serious. Well, I used to.